Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is pound, and this verb was suggested by the viewer Luis, so thank you so much for this suggestion. Let's now take a look at some of the definitions or the ways that we use this verb. The first way you might hear pound used can mean to strike or hit something heavily, or you might think kind of hitting them hard, and many times repeatedly, so again and again. A second way to use the verb pound can mean to crush or grind something into a powder or a paste, and you might be using some kind of instrument like a pestle, which is something frequently used in cooking. So again, we're kind of pressing and grinding something. Now, a third way you might hear pound used can mean to beat, throb, or vibrate with a strong and regular rhythm. Some people will talk about their heart pounding in a situation maybe that makes them feel rather nervous or anxious. I know sometimes students have told me when they have to do public speaking, they can feel their heart pounding. So a rather strong and regular rhythm to their heartbeats. A fourth way you might hear pound used is a bit more informal or slang, and that can be to defeat an opponent in a very strong and convincing way. So if we're thinking about soccer or football as an example, a match that's 2-1, right? I wouldn't use that verb to describe it. But if you have a match where somebody wins 7-1, right? We might say that first team pounded the losing team. A fifth way you can use the verb pound is also very informal, and that can mean to drink or consume liquids rapidly. Now, many times when people use this particular verb to talk about drinking something very quickly or rapidly, they're especially using it in connection to alcoholic types of beverages. So you might hear about people pounding beers as one example. So again, drinking them very quickly and usually a large quantity as well. For now, you should know that pound is a regular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, all you need to do is add ing to form pounding. The past tense and the participle forms of this verb can be made by adding ed. Our base verb, pound, ends in a D sound. This means when I add the ed ending, I'm going to add an extra syllable to the word. Okay? It should sound like this: pounded, pounded. That ed is making an id sound. Okay? Now, I know we've just reviewed a lot of definitions for this particular verb, but there are actually even more ways to use the verb pound. We're going to focus today's discussion on some phrasal verbs with pound. The first one we'll talk about today is to pound along. People use this to talk about walking, marching, or running along some place, and usually they're taking steps with great force, so they're really pressing down as they do it. An example of how you might hear this used: the principal pounded along the hallway toward the gymnasium. So when I think of people really pressing hard as they walk or march somewhere, many times my mind goes to how they might be feeling. So I think my reaction to the sentence is like, the principal is probably angry, maybe with some students, could be with a teacher, right? And so they're kind of walking and pressing hard, making a lot of noise as they step or walk. Another phrasal verb you might encounter is to pound down. This can mean to strike something downward repeatedly and again with a lot of force. An example of this in a sentence might be: the bounce house operator always pounds down stakes so that it doesn't get blown away in the wind. Now, this sentence is a simple present tense sentence. We're describing someone's habit or their routine. A bounce house might sound kind of silly if you're not familiar with it. It's pretty common here in the United States at festivals, even maybe sometimes a person's house. They might have something that can be inflated, right, with air, and then children can bounce or jump up and down on it. So here we're talking about maybe taking something and securing that item to the ground so that wind can't blow it away. Another phrasal verb you might encounter is to pound into. This can mean to strike something repeatedly until it penetrates a surface. An example of this might be, don't pound that nail into the wall. Right? So here we're saying we don't want the nail to go through the wall, to penetrate the wall. Now there's a second and maybe less formal way to use pound into, and this is more of a metaphor, right? So a lot of our examples here, we've been talking about force and striking things or hitting things. Here, it's sort of like we're doing it, but to our brain. So we're trying to commit some piece of information into our long-term memory. An example of this might be, our teacher has been pounding these formulas into our heads for several weeks. So this implies a lot of repetition. We're trying really hard to maybe memorize some formulas that will be needed on a particular exam or test. Now, before we move on to some more phrasal verbs, I am remembering that I've not done a great job of talking about the different verb tenses. So let's go back up to the top here. The principle pounded along is an example of the simple past tense. We're talking about a completed action. Okay. I said the second one was a simple present sentence where we were talking about habits and routines. Our third example here is an imperative, a command. Here, this is a negative command. We're telling someone not to do something. And then the last example sentence is one using the present perfect progressive or present perfect continuous. So where we're talking about an action that started in the past and is continuing into the present. Now, I think we're ready for some more phrasal verbs. The next one we're going to discuss is to pound on. Many times, we use that to talk about banging or hitting on something. An example of how you might hear this used. The police officers pounded on the suspect's door, right? So this isn't just a light sort of tap, right? I'm trying to tap on my computer, right? This is a much harder sound, right? Using someone's fist, right? That is another simple past tense sentence, by the way. The police officers pounded on. The next phrasal verb we'll discuss is to pound out. This can have a number of different meanings. We're going to talk about 3 of them. The first way you might hear pound out used means to flatten something. An example of this. She pounded out 5 cube steaks for dinner. There's another simple past tense sentence. You can imagine maybe a mound of meat, right? And using some kitchen tool to flatten it. A second way to use pound out is used in connection to playing a piano or maybe a keyboard. And it's when someone is playing rather loudly, but not necessarily well. So usually there's some difficulty, maybe a wrong note here and there. An example of this might be, he's been pounding out, Mary had a little lamb for the last hour. So here, maybe we're talking about someone who is just learning to play. Maybe they've been trying to practice this, but again, we're just kind of hearing these loud noises, maybe wrong notes as this person practices. That's another example of the present perfect progressive or present perfect continuous. A third way to use pound out can mean to type something on a keyboard. You might hear this as people type messages on a cell phone or a laptop or tablet, any type of device that can have a keyboard. So an example of this. He has already pounded out several angry emails today. So again, maybe we can kind of imagine someone really pressing the keys sort of hard, and that is a frequent usage, again, with this. I know I talked about angry steps and now angry typing, and that's frequently how I have heard others use it. Another phrasal verb you might encounter is to pound up. Okay, we're back to that meaning of striking or hammering something, but this time you're breaking it into many pieces. An example of this. We'll pound up the brick patio this weekend. Okay? So here, kind of we're going to break it down. We're going to break all these bricks into many different pieces. We'll pound up the patio is an example of the simple future using will. And I'm realizing the fourth example here, he has already pounded out. I didn't tell you what verb tense that was. It's the present perfect. So we've just started describing an action, started earlier today, and is continuing. Okay. Now, let's take a moment and talk about some words and phrases that are related to our verb pound. And the first word we're going to discuss is just the noun form of this word. The noun pound can also have several different meanings. The first way it gets used is in a system of measurements. Now, the vast majority of people on the planet Earth use the metric system. But in the United States and the UK, we have a different system of measurement. So when we talk about weight, many times we talk about pounds. And you can see from my notes here on the screen, 1 pound is equal to 0.4536 kilograms. So if that kind of helps you gather how significant that weight is. An example of this noun in a sentence might be, this recipe calls for a pound of cheese. Okay. Now, a second way to use the noun pound is to talk about monetary units. Again, in the UK, and I believe some other countries in the Middle East, this is how they measure money, right? In the United States, we talk about dollars, but in other places, right, there are other terms. So a pound can also be referring to money. So an example here. Most meals here cost 15 pounds, right? So kind of letting us know what the price is. A third way to use the noun pound is to refer to a place. This is generally where people take sort of stray animals that you might think of as being pets, but do not have a home. So maybe they're lost from their owners. Maybe they ran away, something of that nature. But it's most common we see dogs, maybe cats taken to this place until they can be claimed by someone. So an example here. The dog's going to be kept at the pound until its owners are located. This word or this meaning of pound isn't quite as common. I feel like I heard that a lot as I was growing up. Now I feel like a little more common to hear the phrase animal shelters. So you might just be aware of that as well. Now, one phrase that we're going to talk about today is to pound the street or pound the pavement. This is generally where someone is walking along streets, maybe even running, and they're searching for something. Here's an example of how you might hear this used. He's been pounding the pavement each day this week looking for a summer job. Okay? So maybe someone has gone to a business district, they're walking inside various shops and stores, seeing are there job openings? Is it a possibility to find work here? Another phrase you might encounter is pound for pound. This is most commonly used when we're trying to compare something, right, and its weight to something that's a little different, but also kind of comparing its weight. So let's take a look at an example here. Pound for pound, this is the most profitable crop for farmers. Okay? So here, we know farmers can grow all kinds of different types of crops or food, right? And someone is suggesting one of these, right? If I take a pound of this versus a pound of that or that, right? This first one is most profitable. One last phrase for us to discuss today. It's kind of an unpleasant or scary one, a pound of flesh. Here, flesh is referring to skin. Okay? When people use this phrase, they're talking about someone and suggesting that there's a payment or a penalty that will need to be paid in order to fulfill some sort of deal or maybe fulfilled as part of a punishment. And many times, because we're talking about kind of a human's body, this punishment or this penalty is thought to be rather inhumane or ruthless. An example of this: if you don't pay him back on time, he'll want a pound of flesh. So again, here we're suggesting someone is expecting a lot in order to be repaid. Again, a special thanks to Luis for suggesting today's verb. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a great day.